Perhaps the most influential and imitated, not to mention controversial corporate CEO of the last half century.
Jack Welch.
Jack Welch.
Do you know why Jack Welch is the greatest leader since the pharaohs?
Earlier this year, Google CEO Sundar Pichai laid off 12,000 employees after calling for a simplicity sprint to increase productivity. When Bob Iger returned to Disney, he immediately announced he would eliminate 7,000 jobs. When Elon Musk took over Twitter, one of the first things he did, besides pull a few embarrassing and cringy stunts,
in a tweet, Musk wrote, "Entering Twitter HQ, let that sink in,"
was ask managers to rank their employees in each department and fire the bottom 10%. To which managers responded, "Rank by what metric, dude?" The modern CEO learned to cut the fat and destroy the lives of workers without remorse. From basically one guy, one CEO, Jack Welch.
Social responsibility means win.
You may not have heard of him, but Jack Welch, the CEO of General Electric, is the reason why companies offshore jobs, do massive cost-cutting layoffs, and pour all of their profits into stock buybacks.
During the 80s, GE earnings have increased every quarter, now growing at a rate 3 times the national average and accelerating.
And the thing that's surprising is that it didn't used to be this way. This is the Classroom for More Perfect Union, and today we're talking about Jack Welch, the man who reinvented the American CEO. Jack Welch took over General Electric in 1981. I was less than 1 year old, but I was alive in the 80s. Take that as you will. At the time, General Electric was the all-American company. It was founded by Thomas Edison in 1892, and there were few industries it didn't touch. It was famous for the light bulb, but also the electrical grid, aviation, hydroelectric power, and x-ray machines. It was also synonymous with middle-class suburban prosperity.
GE's famous filter flow washing system.
Starting in the 1920s, its household appliances such as dishwashers, toasters, refrigerators were in homes across America. And employees, hundreds of thousands of them, had lifelong careers, a living wage, benefits, and stability. Wow, that sounds amazing. I wonder what happens next. Welch had been a company man. He started at GE at the age of 25 as a junior chemical engineer, making the equivalent of $107,000 a year. He said he didn't quite fit in at GE. He was raised Irish Catholic in a working class home in Salem, Massachusetts. He didn't like wearing ties. He was brash and aggressive. When Jack Welch took over, GE employed more than 400,000 people and was worth $14 billion. In just a few years, both those numbers would change dramatically.
The case for change in General Electric is absolutely clear.
One of the first speeches he made as CEO was in Manhattan's glitzy Pierre Hotel. He promised a new era at GE. He'd sell off underperforming units and cut costs. Anything that he couldn't fix, he'd close or sell.
And only the winners will, in fact, win this game.
In elite business circles and management schools, this speech at the Pierre is considered the beginning of the philosophy of shareholder capitalism. The idea that a company had one priority, and that was to make profits for its investors.
I am not a destroyer of companies. I am a liberator of them.
It's hard to grasp how unusual this line of thinking was at the time. From 1948 to 1979, a company grew along with its workforce. As companies invested in products and factories, productivity went up, and with that, workers' wages. The investors were often the last priority. Gerald Swope, GE's chief executive from 1922 to 1945, practiced what he called welfare capitalism. He gave workers health benefits and a profit-sharing plan. In an annual report from 1953, GE boasted about how it had paid all its taxes and that it had spent a whopping 37% of its revenue on workers' pay and benefits. This wasn't Jack Welch's philosophy, though. Welch thought GE was bloated, too much bureaucracy, too many redundancies. He thought keeping employees on for life and giving everyone from the janitor to the executive suite benefits was sentimental and wasteful.
And layers and bureaucrats and parking spaces. Ugh. Horrible.
In his autobiography, Welch wrote that GE was known as a supertanker, strong and steady in the water. What Welch wanted instead was a speedboat. One of the first things Welch did was lay people off. In the first 2 years, he laid off 72,000 people and shut down a dozen factories. He instituted what he called the vitality curve. Every manager of every unit would rank their department and fire the bottom 10% every year. This is the practice that CEOs would carry on into the 21st century. Microsoft was famous for it, Jeff Bezos does it today, and Adam Newman did it before he left WeWork disgraced.
We believe that everyone is a creator. Ashton's a creator, and you're a creator, and our friends behind the camera are creators. We all have superpowers.
It wasn't as though GE was struggling. It was still one of the top 10 companies in the world, but that didn't matter to Welch. He knew that the growth he wanted couldn't come from GE alone, so he focused on buying companies and selling off any unit within GE that wasn't ranked first or second in the world. He offshored jobs and replaced lifetime workers with contractors who could be paid less. He moved unionized factories to states with less union power or overseas. Ideally, he once said, you would have every plant you own on a barge. USA, USA, USA. But he was chipping away at the manufacturing work that had given GE its reputation and a household name. Welch was expanding something else, GE Capital. This is where he knew he could make the company rich. He bought up insurance companies, got into credit card loans. I have a homeboy that worked for GE, and he used to talk about this all the time, and it didn't make sense to me that GE owned insurance companies. And I think about the excitement in his face he would speak with when he would talk about how rich and ruthless his company is. He's in government now. Where was I? The political climate was changing, and Welch knew how to take advantage. In 1972, a group of top executives formed the Business Roundtable, a kind of supervillain lobbying group that was determined to have a direct influence on Washington. This group of CEOs, including Welch, lobbied against antitrust laws and blocked labor law reform. When Ronald Reagan became president in 1981, they suddenly had an administration ready to do their bidding. The Business Roundtable convinced their Securities and Exchange Commission to allow more mergers and acquisitions and change the tax code to loosen restrictions on stock buybacks, which had been heavily regulated since the Great Depression. This was where Welch really started to put his focus at GE, stock buybacks. Stock buybacks are a get-rich-quick scheme for the 1%. If profits are falling, companies can buy their own stock from investors, limiting supply and artificially boosting the value of the company. In 1990, GE purchased $10 billion of its own stock, at the time the largest buyback in history. In an article in the New York Times, critics worried that too many businesses were following Welch's lead. They weren't actually creating products, they weren't trying to compete with manufacturers overseas, they were just artificially boosting their stocks. It's almost as if capitalism doesn't work. This is how Jack Welch made GE the most valuable company in the world.
Share owner equity reached 19.4%.
Quarter after quarter, Jack was able to top GE's earnings. These early fat years at GE made Welch a celebrity. He was named Manager of the Century by Fortune magazine and called the most widely admired, studied, and imitated CEO of his time. There was just one problem. Welch was lying. Before each quarter, Welch was able to boost GE's stock by doing a complex mixture of acquisitions and closings, international financing, tax write-offs, and buybacks to hit the exact target Welch wanted Wall Street to see. Eventually, this caught up to Welch. GE was fined $50 million for inflating its earnings and hiding the fact that actually business wasn't going so well. As Welch's stardom grew, he became fascinated with media. He understood the power of the press and wanted his own network. In 1985, he bought RCA in order to sell off the struggling sectors, but keep the real get, NBC.
They're calling it a merger. It was one of those gun-to-the-head mergers, ladies and gentlemen, by the friendly folks at GE.
He created CNBC,
the Consumer News and Business Channel.
It was the early years of the 24-hour news cycle, and Welch wanted business reporting to have the same urgency and fan base that a sports network could have. CNBC's ratings increased along with the stock market as more Americans became interested in stocks and finance as an American pastime. In 1997, Business Roundtable published a paper called The Statement on Corporate Governance. The principal objective of a business enterprise, it said, is to generate economic returns to its owners. Welchian philosophy and shareholder capitalism had prevailed. Welch retired from GE in 2001 with a farewell gift of $417 million, one of the largest severance payouts in history, and $900 million in stock. He wrote his first memoir, Jack, straight from the gut. Oh, you can't be serious. Oh, shit. Okay. Oh, it sounds like a 90s hip hop album. Ugh. All right. Jack, straight from the gut, with a $10 million advance, even more than what was offered to the Pope. A few years later, during a divorce settlement with his first wife, the press discovered that Welch hadn't just gotten a large severance package, he'd also enjoyed basically all aspects of his life covered by GE. Asked to comment, a spokesperson at GE, presumably being paid to do damage control for Jack Welch, reminded reporters that Welch made GE's fortunes rise by hundreds of billions of dollars, implying that Welch was worth it. For the shareholders, maybe he was. Under Welch, GE's revenue increased fivefold to $130 billion. He'd also laid off half of GE's workforce and closed dozens of factories across the United States. The new CEO of General Electric, Jeffrey Immelt, continued Welch's practice of mergers and acquisitions and expanded GE Capital to include subprime mortgages and short-term lending. Great stuff. In 2008, GE's stock fell by 42% and GE Capital by 80%. The company never really recovered, and in 2021, GE split into 3 companies and sold off its major assets. 10 years after shuttering its last light bulb factory in the United States, GE was no longer the most valuable company in the world.
This is a disgrace, what happened here. It was a great American company.
Former General Electric CEO and Chairman Jack Welch has died at the age of 84. In a statement, his wife Susie says, more than anything else, Jack was a life force made of love.
Welch's influence is hard to overstate. Managers he trained and mentored went on to run dozens of S&P 500 companies, Equifax, Albertson, Boeing, and Chrysler. The practices he pioneered are now commonplace, using contractors, offshoring labor, putting stock buybacks ahead of investment or innovation. These practices are all for the benefit, first and foremost, of the shareholder, and for the short-term goal of boosting quarterly earnings. In 2019, the Business Roundtable issued a new statement signed by 300 CEOs, from Jeff Bezos to Tim Cook of Apple to the CEOs of Walmart and BlackRock. They claimed that the era of shareholder capitalism was over. The new purpose of the corporation was to create long-term value that benefits employees, communities, suppliers, and customers. Oh, sounds amazing. But of course, these same CEOs union bust and don't raise wages to a living wage. They dump toxic chemicals, lobby to remove regulations. Welch's legacy still informs much of corporate America, and it would take dramatic changes in our labor laws and the financial system as a whole to restore the balance of power back to working people in America. Thanks for watching The Classroom for more Perfect Union. We based this episode on a few books: David Gale's great biography on Welch, The Man Who Broke Capitalism, Barry Lynn's End of the Line, and of course, the book from the man himself, Jack Welch's Straight from the Gut. Are there other heroes and anti-heroes of American capitalism that you want to see episodes about? Comment below, and as always, like and subscribe to support more videos like this one. I'm an FD Signifier. Thank you so much for watching. Peace.